How's it, guys? Chairman Mo. This broadcast is supposed to be a very quick one. It's in response to a conversation I'm having to a brother of mine. He's essentially posted a status that says, um, "What's this? This was the price of or this is what 100 rand could buy you in 2015, and this is what 100 rand can buy you today, in electricity. That's South African rands, right?" And his caption was vote wisely, vote with your brain, not with your emotions. And my question was, well, ESCOM is run by citizens. So what do you mean, vote with your brains, not your emotions? Obviously, I understand the underlying undertone. Don't vote for the ANC, vote for another party, but we never say what that other party is. But as so is often confused, government is made up not just of the ANC, but made of all the political parties that sit in parliament. And we have what we call a representative political system, meaning that the EFF represents X percent of the population, whether you voted or not, that sort of a thing. So, by virtue of the EFF sitting in parliament, it's assumed that you are sitting in parliament, right? Um, and so it goes on to say, propose a solution, because I said all of them. I said there's no one party that's not eating, at ESCOM, that sort of a thing. And I think I said, I used to think that people who don't vote are only voting for the winner, which is what people will always tell you, that if you don't vote, you're going to vote for the ANC, or you're voting for the winning party. And I said, that's not true, actually. People who don't vote are showing that have this type of political arrangement, the representative politics, is and has failed. And I think this is a recording I've wanted to make. As I said, I hope it's no longer than 10 minutes. Probably will land um, at around 20 minutes. Okay. Um, Sorry, I'm just multitasking. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry, very sorry about that. Um, yeah, so I said to him, that's the case. I don't think that people who don't vote are essentially voting for the winner, right? Um, what we maybe never get to, and that's because you don't want to come up with a solution and then attack that solution. The people who are involved in multi-party politics are disingenuous, because they have essentially agreed that the pie is this big. If you've got your company, i.e., political party, in the hat, then you are bound to come up with something. And if you fail to come up with something, then it's your fault because you didn't campaign enough. But the votes are there, the population is set. I mean, not to tout my own horn, or even to tout my own horn, because sometimes you don't have to be humble around these sort of things. I think for the last 10 years, I've had a consistent group of people that have straight up said to me that, listen, the day you run for president, I'm going to vote for you. Or the day you run for politics or whatever, I'm going to vote for you. Right. And you have a situation where a lot of very smart people sit on the sidelines and say they would never participate in politics, either because whatever, they don't want to lose their lives, or they don't want to damage their reputations. Or, as is my case, I just don't think politics is the best vehicle for participating in a capitalist society. I think asset managers are, you know, I think you're much more effective with R1 billion in politics or in a capitalist society than you are with a political party. That's just my take. I think asset managers run politics. And so one day, as I was sitting there and going through this phrase, if you don't vote, you're voting for the winners. If you don't vote, you're voting for the winners. Because I used to be the person that also encourages people to vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for. And I'd sit there and I think it should matter who you vote for. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose of why we're encouraging you to vote and to vote with your brain and not to vote with your emotions. And I realized the reason it doesn't matter who you vote for is because if there's 20 million of us that make up the voting population, and less than, let's say, 12 million, and I'm actually gonna go on the IEC party, and actually I'm gonna go through a Google search with you guys and try have a look. What's the threshold for a multi-party political system to still have legitimacy? That's the exact words that you're actually looking for. Let me actually search that in the background as we speak. I'm gonna start with Chat GPT simply because I'm not dumb, you know. I don't just go to Google for the sake of Google and then sit there and hope that it gives me answers to things that I don't have, yeah, a sort of picture for, right? But here's the hypothesis. For me, the hypothesis is if the multi-party system gets less than, let's say, 40% of voting population as votes. So if we are 20 million, so if I say 20 million, sorry, I have to do this calculator. I'm not good at multitasking. Multiply by zero point 0.4, so 8 million. So if less than 8 million people vote as a hypothesis, right? Then it's incumbent on the constitution to come up with a new method of choosing leadership and leaders. That's just what I think should happen. So actually, if you don't vote, you're not voting for the winner. You're voting for a new solution altogether. And if that's not how it works, then we are more screwed than what I thought we were, right? That's my logic. And the idea is, well, what's the alternative? And I think that's a question that I get quite common. Let me just look, if I go on YouTube and I say Muammar Gaddafi Green Book, and I do this so that you guys can see where to get what I'm recommending. Yes, it's this, how many hours is it? Come on, show me the time. This 2 hours, it's about 2 hours that the Green Book is. You go and you listen to that. I think it's the first 30 minutes actually, so you don't even have to listen to the whole thing. The first 30 minutes, say copy link. Okay, copy. That's copied. The first 30 minutes of Mama Gaddafi's Green Book, you go listen to that, and it will essentially give you the solution as to what I think you should then do, right? And it's actually not representative politics or representative party, wara, wara, wara. It's actually what we should be doing. And it's the whole notion of socials and how to get people to actually sit for themselves in parliament. So instead of electing um, 1 million people vote for the EFF out of 4 million votes, for example, that's 25% of the votes in a country with 60 million people. So that's less than 1% of the votes in actuality, going to parliament to represent us as if they're representing 25% of the population. Then you essentially have got a situation where you actually go to parliament based on the number of votes that you actually represent and not hypothetically represent. I'm not going to go into the confusing conversation of what I just said, but the solution is exactly what I'm talking about. So Chat GPT, we said, what is the threshold number of votes in a multi-party democracy for the system to retain its legitimacy. Please don't kill me for my spelling. The threshold number of votes required for multi-party democracy to retain its legitimacy can vary significantly depending on several factors, such as the size of the electorate, the political culture of the country, and the specific electoral system in place. However, there's no universally agreed upon threshold number of votes that guarantees legitimacy for a multi-party democracy. In general, legitimacy in democracy is not solely determined by the number of votes, a party or candidate receives, but also by the fairness and transparency of the electoral process, the protection of individual rights, the rule of law, and the responsiveness of elected representatives to the needs and preferences of the citizens. Obviously, we know that this is failing oftentimes in countries that are not America. We don't have a responsiveness of elected representatives to the needs and preferences of the citizens. What do I mean? Malema has never come and sat down and asked you guys, what is it that you want? He came up with a manifesto, 5 things that he thinks are topical, 5 things that he takes a position on. It's actually the 7 cardinal pillars of the EFF, not 5. And then he said, this is what we're going to do. Make a noise about it, force you guys to go vote. Optics, FNB Stadium, color red, you name it. If you don't vote, then you're voting for the winner scare tactics. But essentially, they're forcing you to go into a bucket that you don't necessarily think is the best for running the country, but you're willing to pick if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, out of these 5 options, vote for one, then you vote for that one. That's essentially what gives it legitimacy. Obviously, here where it says, by the fairness and transparency of the electoral process, when I say gun to your head, it's figurative, so they don't really put an actual gun to your head, but they create an environment where you feel out of place if you don't vote. It says in some countries there may be legal thresholds for representation in the legislature, such as minimum percentages of the popular vote required to gain seats. However, even if a party or candidate surpasses such thresholds, the legitimacy could still be questioned if the electoral process is marred by fraud, coercion, and irregularities. I think that's the case that happened in the US, where they say Donald Trump essentially used AI before AI was mainstream to basically position his message. I think particularly using Facebook. I'm a Facebook shareholder. Ultimately, legitimacy in a multi-party democracy is a complex and multifaceted concept that depends on a combination of electoral outcomes, institutional integrity, and public trust in the political system. I'll tell you why all of these things are important in a second, then I'll shut off and then get back to what I was busy with. Based on this, okay, then I say in South Africa so that I get an answer specific to South Africa. In South Africa, the threshold for legitimacy in multi-party democracy would depend on various factors, including that South Africa electoral, there isn't specific threshold number of votes required for a party to retain legitimacy, but there is a minimum threshold for representation in the National Assembly. Currently, a party needs to receive at least 0.25% of the national vote to secure a seat in the National Assembly. We'll talk about that. This threshold ensures that smaller parties have a chance to be represented, but also prevents excessive fragmentation in the legislature. However, legitimacy in South Africa's multi-party democracy goes beyond just meeting the electoral thresholds. It also depends on factors such as the fairness, transparency of the electoral process, adherence to democratic principles, protection of human rights, all of those things. Public perception of legitimacy is also crucial. If a political party or if a party or coalition wins a significant share of the vote and is perceived as representing a diverse range of interests, it is more likely to be seen as legitimate by the population. Conversely, if there are widespread allegations of electoral fraud, corruption, or other irregularities, it could undermine the legitimacy of the electoral outcome. Overall, while there are technical thresholds in South Africa's electoral system, legitimacy in a multi-party democracy like South Africa is a complex and dynamic issue. Let me ask it by inverting, right? Is it true that when you don't vote, you are automatically voting for the winner? That's a question. The statement, when you don't vote, is a common saying used to encourage people to participate in elections, as I had said. However, it's more of a rhetorical device than a literal truth. In many electoral systems, the winner is determined by the votes cast, not by the absence of votes. Exactly. Therefore, abstaining from voting doesn't directly contribute to the success of any particular candidate or party. However, in a close election where voter turnout is a significant factor, a low turnout can indeed affect the outcome. In such cases, if a large number of eligible voters choose not to vote, it could potentially skew the results in favor of the candidate or party with the most dedicated supporters who did turn out to vote. In a broader sense, abstaining from voting can be seen as indirectly benefiting the leading candidate or party if one assumes that those who abstain would have voted for their leading candidate or party if they had participated. However, this assumption may not always hold true, as there are various reasons why people choose not to vote, including apathy, complacency, disillusionment with the political system, or logistical barriers. Ultimately, while abstaining from voting may have consequences for the outcome of an election, it's not accurate to say that abstention is equivalent to voting for the winner. There we go. Abstaining from voting is a legitimate choice, and individuals may have valid reasons for choosing not to participate in the electoral process. Let me ask this question. Close turnout significant, the low turnout. How low a turnout in South Africa will warrant the IEC declaring the elections non-valid? The Independent Electoral is responsible for administering elections in the Wara Wara Wara. South Africa voter turnout has historically been relatively high compared to many other countries. However, if voter turnout were to drop significantly to the point where it undermines the credibility and representativeness of the election, the IEC could potentially declare the election non-valid or take other measures to address the situation. Factors that the IEC might consider when assessing the validity of an election include the legal requirements, i.e., the Electoral Act of South Africa sets out procedures for conducting elections, including provisions related to voter registration, all of those things. Voter turnout trends, the IEC monitors voter turnout throughout the voting period and compares it to historical turnout levels and expectations. A significant drop in turnout, especially if it is widespread across different regions or demographic groups, could raise concerns about the representativeness of the election. These are the things I want to touch on, right? Public participation, the IEC considers public confidence in the electoral process and may take into account public statements, complaints, and reports from domestic and international observers, and then impact on election results. While voter turnout alone does not determine the validity of an election, the IEC may consider whether low turnout has a significant impact on the outcome of election. For example, if voter turnout is so low that it skews the results or prevents certain groups from being adequately represented, the IEC may take this into account when assessing the validity of the election. Ultimately, the decision to declare an election non-valid or take other remedial action would depend on the specific circumstances and would be made by the IEC in accordance with its mandates to uphold the integrity of the electoral process in South Africa. This is actually my long way of saying if you don't vote, you're not evil. If you don't vote, whatever guilt people try and place on you, I personally absolve you from it. I think we are living in shitty times and you shouldn't be expected to select the best smelling shit out of the whole pot. Personally, if voter turnout is a legitimate way to declare elections invalid and non-representative, then I'm one of the people that may actually be leaning towards taking that particular route. As I said, I'm a fan of economics being a much better tool for having the conversations we need to have in the country. So I think talking about where money goes to and how money is spent is a better representation of a voice than electing politicians that just circle around whatever they play musical chairs. You know, when you are not happy in this minister of sports, then he gets moved from there to become the minister of arts, and from the minister of arts to become the minister in the presidency. But it's the same faces that are just eating over and over from different parts, including even with the opponents or whatever. What do they call it? Who are the number twos and number threes? Like when you, everyone who's in parliament is government. The government is not just the winning party. And so for me, even if we elect a whole new party altogether, no party in the last 30 years has, while they were in parliament, come up with a voice that I felt like, you know what, this voice speaks for South Africans. It's always how can we weaken the guy on top of us. So number three will try weaken number two will try weaken number one. And you can hear that all that they're doing is campaigning to become number two or number one. In fact, there's a joke that says nobody wants to be the ruling party. Everybody wants to be number two. That's the underlying joke in politics. And the reason is when you're the ruling party, everybody hates you because everybody thinks that you are the governing party, not realizing that everybody that's sitting in parliament is the governing party. So you have a situation where the political industry is the 300 to 500 people that sit in parliament, and it just circulates around that. When people then are no longer on the ballot box of the ANC, they go sit on the ballot paper of UDM or IDF or IDP or UEFF or whatever other F and A and U and I and that sort of a thing. But when all is said and done, it's the same set of 500 players that are participating and that are always going to be playing there. I am 100% a fan of the Green Book method that Gaddafi proposes. If voting is the way that we want to do it, it has a much better, what do they call it inside this article? It has a much better, I think they said representation as well as legitimacy in terms of representation of diverse interests and that one that they said hey, Skwa is running away. See, I didn't want this to be long. I'll tell you now. The responsiveness of elected representatives to the needs and preferences of society or of citizens. The Libya system before Gaddafi was killed had much better outcomes in this regard. And I think that's what we need. We don't need new, better plans. We need new, better execution and new, better responsiveness to the needs and preferences of citizens. And I've got total comfort that the current system is not going to yield that. And so I'm a fan of people not voting because it is a vote for us to change the system. It's not a vote for the winning party, as indicated here in the last question I asked, or the second last question that I asked. Um, yes, the winner is determined by the votes cast and not by the absence of votes. Therefore, abstaining from voting doesn't directly contribute to the success of any particular candidate or party. That's that. That's that. Right. Stop guilt tripping people into voting and whatnot. As I say, I normally would be a candidate for telling people to vote. I don't think going forward I'm that person. I don't believe in politics as a solution to the problems that we face in the 21st century. I think finance probably is, technology is, a lot of cooperation and cohesiveness as citizens is. I'm a believer in social media. I'm well invested in a lot of social media companies. I think dialogue, putting more people on social media and having more effective dialogue. So removing gaslighting type of terminology towards men, towards women, towards people that are excluded, and having a lot more diverse points of views in the same rooms, because that's the other challenge with social media. Obviously, you've got currently you've got a room for feminists, a room for the LGBTQ, a room for men, a room for this, and none of them are disagreeing with one another. So as a result, whenever solutions come out, they're coming out from different rooms. We still need to get to a place where the social media dialogue is happening in one room. And I, as a man, can disagree with you as a woman and can disagree with you as LGBTQ and can disagree with the other person. But through that dialogue, once all the arguments have been defeated and or agreed upon, when we walk out of the room, we walk out understanding each person's point of view and also understanding why it is the way that we're going forward is the way, even if it would not have been my preferred way. It has the best balance of pros and cons and allows us to actually build a society. And we didn't do it in silos because currently the silos tell you that, listen, if you are wrong, you are right. If you are right, you are absolutely right. If you are this, you are right. Like everybody's opinion matters, everybody's opinion is correct. But that is happening in individual rooms, and the people that are going to like your comment are obviously the people that follow you because you are probably like minded people, right? And the one person that disagrees with you is going to trend because they're the one odd person in your circle of likes. And as a result, we end up with a situation where we call it confirmation biases. You're only surrounded by the opinions that agree with your opinion. I don't think that's the way forward. I think the way forward is to have a room that is representative of all the views. The views argue against one another, and then we take the winning views and we move them forward, and that's our policy. And over a space of 5 to 10 to 20 to 15 years, those will shape the society that we want. As I said, until that happens, it's obviously wishy-washy. Money continues to be the best votes. At the end of the day, when you walk into an adult store, anybody that's got money is the one that decides to buy a dildo, whether it's a man or a woman or however they identify. And the owner of the shop will tell you that, listen, actually my market for or my decisions on whether to buy stock more dildos is not dependent on the population of men or women or whatever, because everybody is buying them or everybody is not buying them. That's my funny way, non-funny way of saying that I think money and access to information is probably the better political tool for me, not this politicians nonsense. And therefore, if you decide that you're not going to vote, you 100% have got my vote not to do so. Cheers, Chairman Mo.